The rain over the silver peaks didn't just fall, it wept. It was a heavy, rhythmic mourning that pounded against the reinforced, bulletproof glass of Obsidian Manor, the ancestral seat of the Vane bloodline. Outside, the world was a blur of charcoal clouds and jagged pine trees. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and dying hope. At 32, Alpha King Zarek Vane was a man who possessed everything. His fortune could buy small nations. His territory spanned 3 mountain ranges, and his military force, the Black Ridge Sentinels, kept the world's most dangerous predators at bay. But as he stood in his private study, his reflection in the glass told a different story. His eyes, usually a piercing, aristocratic slate gray, were flickering with a volatile molten gold. His wolf was dying, or worse, it was becoming something else. "The sedatives aren't working anymore, sire," Elias, the royal physician, whispered from the doorway. He didn't dare step closer. The air around Zarek vibrated with a low, subsonic growl that made the very crystal decanters on the side table rattle in their trays. "The council is asking questions. The northern packs heard about the incident at the border. The way you tore through that rogue scouting party without a single command. They're calling you the Mad King behind closed doors." Zarek didn't turn. He watched a lightning bolt fracture the sky, mirroring the cracks in his own mind. For a year, the rage had been building, a mindless, feral hunger to tear the world apart. He hadn't slept for more than an hour at a time in months. The insomnia was a slow poison. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw blood. Every time he breathed, he felt the urge to shift and never turn back. If he lost control, he wouldn't just kill his enemies. He would dismantle the fragile peace of the entire modern werewolf society. "The prophecy," Zarek rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "Tell me again." "Every word." "The king will survive only when silence answers the wolf," Elias quoted, his voice trembling. "We've tried every high-ranking Luna in the territory. We've tried the daughters of Alphas, the most powerful sirens, the most gifted healers. We brought in the Oracle of the South. Their power only agitates your wolf further. Dominance cannot fix what is broken, Zarek. You are an Alpha King. You cannot be ordered to be calm by another power. Then what is left?" Zarek turned finally, his face a mask of cold, terrifying beauty. His jaw was tight, his skin pale from exhaustion. "Do I wait for the shift that I can't come back from? Do I let the council execute me for the safety of the realm?" A suggestion came from the archives," Elias said, stepping forward tentatively to lay a leather-bound folder on the mahogany desk. "An elderly advisor, one who served your grandfather, mentioned a woman. No rank, no noble family, no scent. She is a ghost in our system. Her name is Valentina." Zarek sneered, a spark of gold flaring in his pupils. "A nobody? You want me to tie the royal bloodline to a stranger with no status? The council will see it as a white flag. They'll think I've finally lost my mind." "They will think it is a political strategy," Elias countered. "A contract marriage. You tell the world she is a strategic alliance from a hidden faction. But in reality, she is the only one the archives suggest fits the description of silence." 3 days later, a black luxury SUV wound its way up the private mountain road toward the manor. The gate guards, warriors who could scent a threat from 3 miles away, frowned as the vehicle passed. Usually, when a high-ranking female approached the king's estate, the air was thick with the perfumes of power, jasmine, musk, and the sharp pheromones of competition. But from this car there was nothing. The invisible Luna stepped out onto the wet gravel. She wore a simple, well-tailored charcoal coat and leather boots. She didn't look like a queen. She looked like a woman who had seen the end of the world and decided it wasn't worth screaming about. Valentina stood in the shadows of the massive stone pillars of the manor. Looking up at the gargoyles, she had dark, thoughtful eyes and a face that held a terrifying amount of stillness. She didn't fidget, she didn't check her reflection, she simply waited. The pack's elites had gathered in the grand hall to witness her arrival. They were the vultures of the court, women in silk dresses hoping for the king's downfall, and warriors in tactical suits looking for a new leader to follow. KL, the lead warrior. A man whose physical strength was matched only by his arrogance, stepped into her path as she entered. He was 6'5" of pure muscle, his alpha energy radiating off of him like heat from a furnace. He didn't say a word. He simply released a wave of crushing dominance, a psychic weight designed to bring any lesser wolf to their knees. The air in the hall thickened. The other guests moved back. Feeling the phantom pressure, Valentina didn't even blink. She didn't gasp for air. She didn't tremble. She simply paused, looked Kale in the eye with an expression of mild curiosity, and waited for him to finish. "You're in my way," she said softly. Her voice wasn't a challenge. It was a fact. Kale was stunned. His dominance was being ignored as if it didn't exist. "You have no scent," he growled, his eyes glowing amber. "You have no rank. You shouldn't even be able to breathe in this room, let alone stand in my presence." "Perhaps your presence isn't as loud as you think it is," she replied, stepping around him with a grace that felt ancient. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Silence followed her as she walked toward the grand staircase. It was the first of many silences she would bring to the kingdom. Zarek met her in his private drawing room, far from the prying eyes of the court. He stayed in the shadows near the fireplace, his hands clenched behind his back to hide the tremors that racked his frame. The scent of her, or the lack of it, hit him like a cold glass of water. In a world of noise, she was a blank page. "You know the terms," Zarek said, his voice a warning, vibrating with the growl he could no longer suppress. 1 year. You will live in the East Wing. You will receive financial security for the rest of your life. You stay out of pack business. You do not touch me. You do not speak to the press. And most importantly, you do not expect a real marriage. This is a contract of survival, nothing more." Valentina looked at him. She didn't look at his crown, his wealth, or his intimidating frame. Break time 05. She looked directly into his eyes, seeing the gold fire that was burning him alive from the inside out. "I don't want your money, King Zarek," she said. Her voice was resonant like a low note on a cello. "And I don't want your throne. I'm here because I was told you were drowning, and I happen to know how to swim." Zarek let out a jagged, harsh laugh. "You think you can save me? I am a monster in a cage that's breaking. Don't confuse a temporary arrangement with a miracle." "I don't believe in miracles," Valentina said, taking a step closer. For the first time, Zarek felt his wolf tilt its head in curiosity rather than rage. "I believe in balance. Stay in your wing, Valentina," Zarek snapped. The gold flared brightly. "Don't tempt the beast. The beast is only loud because he thinks no one is listening," she whispered. The first week was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The High Council, led by the bitter and traditionalist Elder Vance, was outraged. They saw Valentina as an insult to their sacred bloodlines. They called her the Void, the Ghost Bride, and the Invisible Luna. They tried to break her. At a private luncheon in the glass-walled conservatory, the noblewomen of the pack cornered her. Lady Serafina, a woman who had spent 5 years trying to scent Mark Zarek as her own, leaned in close, her eyes glowing with malice. "Tell us, Luna, what is your lineage?" Serafina sneered. "Which pack gave birth to something so empty? Or did Zarek just find you in a gutter and decide you were the only thing that wouldn't die when he looked at you?" Valentina continued to cut her meal with precision. She didn't look up. Break time 05s. "My lineage isn't your concern, Lady Serafina, but if you're so worried about emptiness, perhaps you should look at why you need to scream so loudly to be seen." Serafina's face contorted. She lunged forward, her claws extending, a clear violation of the king's peace, but she never reached Valentina. The doors to the conservatory swung open with such force the glass rattled. Zarek entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. But he was in the middle of an episode. His breathing was shallow, his pupils were gone, replaced entirely by molten gold. His shadow seemed to loom larger than his body. He was losing it. Right there, in front of the most influential families in the kingdom. "Out!" Zarek roared, a sound that was more wolf than man. The noblewomen scrambled back in terror. Serafina fell over her own chair. The guards moved to intercept the king, fearing he was about to shift and slaughter everyone in the room. Zarek gripped the edge of a marble pedestal, his claws digging into the stone, cracking it. The Mad King was out of his cage. Then, through the chaos, Valentina stood up. She didn't run away. She walked toward him. "Valentina, get back!" Elias shouted from the doorway. She ignored him. She walked into the radius of Zarek's killing intent. She reached out and placed a single, flat palm against his chest, right over his racing heart. "Zarek," she said. She didn't shout. She spoke with a calm that acted like a vacuum, sucking the noise out of the room. "The storm is over. The woods are quiet. It's time to be still." The transformation was terrifying to behold. The gold in Zarek's eyes didn't just fade, it vanished. Break time 05s, his breathing hitched, then smoothed out. The violent vibrations in his muscles went dead. For the first time in 14 months, the screaming in his head stopped. He looked down at her hand on his chest, then up at her face. He looked like a man who had been underwater for a year and had just taken his first breath of oxygen. In the absolute silence that followed, the elites didn't see a weak, scentless human. They saw the most powerful man in the world go quiet at a single word from a stranger. The mystery of Valentina had just become a threat. The silence that followed the incident in the conservatory was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a devastating earthquake. While the noblewomen whispered in the corridors about the witch who had calmed the king, Zarek himself was grappling with a sensation he hadn't felt in a decade. Clarity. For the first time since the madness began, the constant red haze at the edges of his vision had cleared. He retreated to his private wing, but he didn't go to his bed. He paced the length of his balcony, his eyes fixed on the east wing where Valentina was housed. "How," he whispered to the night air. His wolf, usually a thrashing beast of claws and teeth, was curled at the back of his mind, sleeping. It was unnatural, it was beautiful, and it was terrifying. While the king sought a peace, Elder Vance sought a weapon. Vance was a man who believed in the purity of the wolf, that power should be loud, violent, and undeniable. To him, Valentina was a glitch in the universe. He descended into the sub-level 7 archives, a place where the air was thick with the smell of rotting parchment and ancient dust. These were the forbidden vaults, containing records from before the Great Unification, when the wolf packs were nomadic and brutal. Vance bypassed the shelves of lineage books and went to a small, iron-bound chest kept in a salt circle. Inside was a single, charred ledger known as the Chronicle of the Erased. He flipped through the pages until he found a symbol, a circle with a single horizontal line through it, the mark of silence. "And the kings grew afraid," Vance read, his voice a rasping hiss. "For the daughters of the Stillwood did not shift, yet they held the leash of every alpha. With a word, they could turn a warrior into a babe. With a glance, they could stop a heart. The kings declared them soulless. They declared them ghosts. And so, break time 05s. The great hunts began to ensure no wolf would ever again be silenced by a woman's breath." Vance's hand trembled. "She's one of them," he breathed. "The bloodline we spent 500 years trying to kill. She isn't a gift. She's an extinction event." He knew then that a simple social humiliation wouldn't be enough. He needed to prove to the pack that Valentina didn't love the king. She was taming him like an animal. And in the world of the Alpha, there was no greater insult than being broken. Back at the manor, the clock struck 3 a.m. Zarek, unable to sit still despite his newfound calm, found himself walking the darkened hallways toward the east wing. He moved with the predatory grace of his kind, silent as a shadow. He stopped outside Valentina's door. He intended to knock, to demand answers, to assert his dominance. But through the heavy oak door he heard something that stopped him cold. She was singing. It wasn't a song he recognized. There were no words, just a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of his bones. It felt like the earth moving, like the sound of deep water. He pushed the door open without thinking. Valentina was sitting by the window, bathed in the silver glow of the moon. She wasn't wearing her charcoal coat. She was in a simple white silk slip. For the first time, she looked fragile, but her eyes, when they met his, were as vast as the cosmos. "You should be sleeping, Zarek," she said. She didn't stand up. She didn't bow. "What was that sound?" Zarek asked, stepping into the room. He felt the familiar heat of his wolf begin to stir, but it wasn't rage this time. It was a deep, magnetic pull. "Break time 05s. Every time you speak, every time you're near, the beast goes quiet. Why?" Valentina looked back out at the moon. "My people didn't believe in the beast, Zarek. We believed the wolf was a song. If the singer is out of tune, the song becomes a scream. I'm just finding the key again." Zarek walked toward her, stopping only when he was close enough to smell the rain on her skin. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers. "Vance is digging into the past. He thinks you're a threat. He thinks you've come to take the alpha out of the king." "And what do you think?" she asked, her voice a soft challenge. Zarek looked down at his own hands, hands that had torn through steel, hands that were stained with the blood of 100 battles. "I think that for the first time in my life, I don't want to fight, and that scares me more than the madness ever did." In a rare moment of surrender, the Alpha King sat on the floor at the feet of the woman with no rank. He rested his heavy head against her knees. It was a gesture of total trust. A king laying his neck on the executioner's block. Valentina didn't pull away. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then ran her fingers through his dark, messy hair. "Sleep, Zarek," she whispered. And for the first time in a year, the king slept for 6 hours straight. Guarded by the woman the world called a ghost, the peace lasted only until the following evening. The pack's lead warrior, Kale, had been manipulated by Elder Vance. Vance had whispered in his ear that the king was being drugged, that the invisible Luna was using a forbidden siren call to weaken the pack's defenses. Kale decided to test her. Break time .05s. During a mandatory training session in the pit, a massive sunken concrete arena where the warriors practiced their combat shifts, Kale brought out a rogue. A rogue was a wolf who had lost their humanity entirely, a mindless killing machine kept in silver chains for study. This one was a massive gray-furred beast, foaming at the mouth, its eyes white with cataracts and fury. "King Zarek is unavailable today," Kale announced to the gathered warriors and noble onlookers. "But our new Luna has shown such a talent for calming the spirit. Perhaps she would like to demonstrate her gift for the men? To boost morale?" It was a death sentence disguised as a request. Valentina stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at the thrashing monster. She saw Zarek standing on the high balcony, his face a mask of fury. He started to move, to stop the madness, but Valentina caught his eye. She gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't." She descended the stairs into the pit. The warriors watched with bated breath. Some were smirking, expecting her to scream and run. Others felt a twinge of guilt. The rogue was released. The silver chains clattered to the floor. The beast roared, a sound that echoed like a grenade off the concrete walls. It scented her. It saw a small, scentless female. It lunged, a blur of gray fur and yellow fangs. Valentina didn't move. She didn't shift. She didn't even raise her hands to defend herself. She waited until the beast was 3 feet away, its hot breath hitting her face. Enough. The word wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. But it hit the room with the physical force of a shockwave. The rogue didn't just stop. It collapsed. Break time 05s. Its momentum sent it skidding across the concrete until it came to a halt at her feet, its chin resting on her boots. The foam at its mouth ceased. Its white eyes blinked, cleared, and then narrowed as it let out a soft, whimpering sound. A sound a pup makes when it finds its mother. Valentina reached down and stroked the top of its scarred head. "Go to sleep," she whispered. The rogue closed its eyes and drifted into a deep, peaceful slumber. The pit went so silent you could hear the blood rushing in your own ears. Kale stepped back, his face turning pale. Zarek on the balcony felt a surge of pride so fierce it nearly broke him, but beneath it, a cold realization. The secret was out. She wasn't just a bride. She was the master of wolves. The demonstration in the pit changed everything. The warriors no longer mocked her. Break time 05s, they moved out of her way with a fear that bordered on religious. But the council saw it as proof of their worst nightmares. Elder Vance called an emergency session of the 12 thrones. "You saw it," Vance shouted, slamming his fist onto the council table. "She didn't use strength, she used a command. If she can do that to a rogue, what can she do to our sons? To our king? She is a weapon of the ancient world, and she is pointed directly at our hearts." "She is the king's wife," one of the younger elders argued, "and he is healthy again. The madness is gone." "Is it?" Vance sneered. "Or is he just a well-trained dog now? I've contacted the Iron Ridge Pack. King Malphas is interested in our problem. If Zarek won't remove the witch, we will find a king who will." Political betrayal was now in motion. Malphas of the Iron Ridge was the polar opposite of Zarek. He was a brute who believed in the law of the claw. He had been waiting for a moment of weakness in the Silver Peaks for a decade. That night, Zarek invited Valentina to the roof of the manor. He had set up a private dinner. No servants, no guards, just the two of them under the stars. "You shouldn't have gone into the pit," he said, pouring her a glass of dark vintage wine. "I had to," she replied. Kale needed to know that his volume doesn't equal his value. Zarek chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "You're dangerous, Valentina. My advisors are terrified. They think you're going to turn us all into house pets." "Would that be so bad?" she teased, though her eyes remained serious. "To have a world where you don't have to growl to be heard?" Zarek moved closer. "Break time 05s. His hand, finding the small of her back. The touch was electric. There was no contract between them in this moment. There was only the heat of two stars colliding. "I've spent my life being a king," Zarek whispered, his face inches from hers. "I've spent my life being a weapon. With you, I feel like a man. And I'm starting to realize that the man loves you just as much as the wolf does." He didn't wait for her to answer. He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a soft, slow-burn kiss. It wasn't the aggressive claim of an alpha. It was a question. Valentina answered it by pulling him closer. But as they stood on the roof of the world, they didn't see the black luxury SUVs of the Iron Ridge Pack crossing the border. They didn't see the red dots of sniper rifles being calibrated in the woods. The mystery was about to become a war. The air in the Silver Peaks grew unnaturally cold as the lunar cycle approached its zenith. The luxury of the Obsidian Manor, with its heated marble floors and gold-leafed ceilings, felt increasingly like a gilded cage. While Zarek and Valentina found a fragile peace in each other's arms, the gears of a centuries-old hatred were grinding into motion. The Iron Ridge Pack had arrived, their black SUVs idling like predatory insects at the edge of the Vane estate. The Grand Hall of the 12 Thrones was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, soaring arches of dark stone, lit by 1,000 flickering candles that cast long, dancing shadows against the walls. Usually, this room was used for the coronation of kings. Tonight, it was a courtroom. Zarek sat on the central throne, his hand gripping the armrest so hard the ancient wood groaned. "Break time eeks." Valentina stood in the center of the room alone. She wore a dress of midnight silk that shimmered like oil on water. She looked less like a defendant and more like the shadow of a forgotten god. Elder Vance stood at the pulpit, his eyes gleaming with a feverish intensity. "Members of the council, fellow alphas," Vance's voice echoed. "We are told that this woman is a savior. We are told she is the cure for our king's malady. But I ask you, at what cost? Look at our history. Look at the silent ones who once turned our greatest warriors into whimpering pups before they were rightfully purged from this earth." A murmur of ancestral fear rippled through the gathered alphas. "Have proof," Vance continued, signaling to the guards. "We raided the ruins of the old valley. We found the sigils. Valentina is not just a woman with a gift. She is the last descendant of the House of Aethelgard, the bloodline that nearly ended the Age of the Wolf." Zarek stood, his presence flooding the room like a dark tide. "She is my wife. She is the Luna of this pack by royal decree." A decree made by a man whose mind was clouded, a new voice boomed. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung open. King Malphas of the Iron Ridge stepped forward. He was a brute of a man, scarred and massive, draped in the furs of his fallen enemies. Behind him stood a phalanx of warriors, their hands resting on tactical sidearms. Zarek Vane, Malphas sneered. You've grown soft, you've let a ghost into your bed and a witch into your head. If you won't protect the dignity of the wolf, the Iron Ridge will do it for you. In the chaos of the accusations, Zarek felt a tug at his sleeve. It was Elias, the physician, looking pale. Sire, he whispered, you need to see this now. While the council argued, Zarek slipped away through a secret passage behind the throne, pulling Valentina with him. They descended deep into the foundations of the manor, past the wine cellars, to a door that hadn't been opened in 3 generations, the king's private reliquary. Inside, the room was filled with holographic displays and ancient artifacts. Elias pointed to a pulsating blue crystal, a memory stone. Your grandfather didn't hunt the Silent Ones because they were evil, Zarek, Elias said, his voice trembling. He hunted them because he was a coward. The memory stone flickered to life. An image of the first Alpha King appeared. He was weeping. Break Time 05's beside him stood a woman who looked exactly like Valentina. The madness is not a disease, the holographic king whispered. It is the price of our power. Every Alpha King eventually loses his soul to the rage. The Silent Ones were not our enemies. They were our anchors. Without them, we are nothing but monsters. I am purging them today because I cannot bear to be seen in my weakness by a woman who knows my heart. Zarek turned to Valentina, his eyes wide with a devastating realization. The Great Hunt hadn't been a war of survival. It had been an act of monumental ego. The kings had destroyed their only hope of remaining human because they were too proud to be managed. They didn't fear you because you were dangerous, Zarek rasped, his hand cupping Valentina's cheek. They feared you because you were the only ones who truly knew us. The sounds of violence erupted from the hall above. Malphas had stopped waiting for a verdict. He had launched his coup. Zarek and Valentina emerged from the vault to find the grand hall in flames. Malphas' warriors were tearing through the Silver Peak's guards. The wolf call frequency, the high-pitched pulse Vance had prepared, was blaring through the manor's speakers, a sound that forced every wolf into a state of agonizing, involuntary shifting. Warriors were screaming, their bones snapping and reforming as they turned into mindless beasts. Zarek felt the gold flare in his eyes. The rage was back, amplified by the frequency. He fell to his knees, his fingernails clawing at the stone floor. Valentina, run! He gasped, his teeth lengthening. I can't! Break time equal 5s, hold it. Malphas stood over him, laughing. He was in his semi-shifted form, a terrifying hybrid of man and wolf. He raised a silver-edged blade. I'll kill the witch first, Zarek. Then I'll put you out of your misery. Malphas lunged toward Valentina, but Valentina didn't flinch. She stood in the center of the burning hall, her eyes turning a deep, swirling violet, the color of a storm at twilight. I told you once, she said, her voice cutting through the roar of the fire and the screams of the dying, that you are only loud because you are afraid. She stepped forward, her bare feet pressing against the cold stone. She didn't shout. She didn't use a command. She opened her soul. A wave of absolute, terrifying silence radiated from her. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the absence of intent. The fire seemed to freeze in mid-air. The frequency pulse from the speakers shattered, the electronics melting under the weight of her presence. Malphas froze, his blade inches from her throat. He tried to growl, but his vocal cords refused to work. He looked into her eyes and saw the beginning and the end of all things. Kneel. It wasn't a request. It was the fundamental law of the universe asserting itself. Malphas's knees hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud. Behind him, 50 Iron Ridge warriors collapsed as if their spines had turned to water. Even the loyal Silver Peak's guards were pinned to the ground. Only Zarek remained standing. He felt the command wash over him, but instead of crushing him, it felt like a cool rain on a wildfire. He stood upright, his eyes clear gray, his wolf finally truly at peace. Break time 05s. Valentina walked past the paralyzed Malphas and stopped in front of Elder Vance, who was cowering behind the pulpit. "You spent your life digging in the dirt for secrets, Vance," Valentina said, her voice echoing in the dead silence. "But you forgot the most important one. We don't rule the wolf. We are the silence that allows the wolf to hear the world." The battle was over. Not through blood, but through the terrifying grace of the woman they had mocked. Malphas was exiled, his pack disbanded and absorbed. Vance was stripped of his title and sent to the frozen wastes of the north. But the real change was inside the Obsidian Manor. The following morning, the sun rose over the silver peaks, turning the snow to gold. Zarek and Valentina stood on the highest balcony, looking out over their kingdom. "They want to crown you properly," Zarek said, leaning against the railing. He looked younger, the shadows beneath his eyes gone. "The council is terrified, but the people, the warriors, they look at you like you're a miracle." "I told you." Valentina smiled. "I don't believe in miracles." Zarek turned to her. He didn't use his alpha presence. He didn't use his royal authority. He took her hand and, in full view of the guards and the servants in the courtyard below, he slowly dropped to one knee. "Zarek, what are you doing?" she whispered, her breath hitching. "I'm ending the war," he said. He looked up at her with a love that was more powerful than any prophecy. "For 500 years, my fathers tried to break yours. They thought that to be a king, they had to be alone in their power. They were wrong." He kissed the palm of her hand. "I don't want a contract, Valentina. I don't want a savior. I want a partner. I want the woman who saw the monster and told it to be still." Valentina reached down. Her fingers trembling as she stroked his jaw, she pulled him up, her heart finally full. "The silence is over, Zarek," she whispered. "From now on, we tell the story together." Below them, the Silver Peaks pack let out a long, melodic howl. It wasn't a challenge or a threat. It was a song, in perfect key, for the first time in history. Years later, the invisible Luna would be remembered in the history books as the woman who saved the wolves from themselves. Under her and Zarek's rule, the madness vanished. The packs moved out of the shadows of violence and into an age of unprecedented prosperity. But in the private gardens of the Obsidian Manor, away from the politics and the crowds, there was a small hidden bench near a fountain. There, an alpha king would often be seen, with his head resting in the lap of a scentless woman. And in the quiet of the mountain air, if you listened closely, you wouldn't hear the roar of a beast. You would only hear the sound of two hearts, beating in a perfect, beautiful silence. The smoke from the moon phase gala had long since cleared, and the charred tapestries of Obsidian Manor had been replaced with deep emerald velvet. To the outside world, the Silver Peaks pack was stronger than ever, but inside the inner sanctum, a new kind of tension was brewing. Now that the madness was gone, the political vultures began to realize that Valentina was not just a cure. She was a sovereign power. Break time 05s. Zarek sat in the war room staring at a digital map of the territories. For the first time in his life, his head didn't throb. His wolf was so calm it was almost eerie, like a lake reflecting a clear sky. But as he looked at the casualty reports from the coup, his jaw tightened. "The Eastern packs are refusing to send their tithes," Kale reported. The lead warrior had changed since the night in the pit. His arrogance had been replaced by a watchful, almost protective deference toward Valentina. "They're saying that if a scentless woman is running the Silver Peaks, then the Alpha King has abdicated his strength. They're calling our peace a hollow kingdom." Zarek stood, his gray eyes flashing. "Let them call it what they want. I am not going back to the bloodletting." "It's not just the tithes, Zarek." Kale hesitated. "There are rumors of a purist movement. They believe Valentina is a psychological parasite. They think she hasn't healed you. They think she's hollowed you out." Zarek slammed his hand on the table. "I am more myself than I have ever been." "I know that," Kale said quietly. "But they need to see it. They're demanding a trial of blood and bone. A traditional hunt where the Luna proves she can provide for the pack's spirit. If she fails, the council has the legal right to nullify the marriage." While Zarek fought the politics of the present, Valentina was haunted by the ghosts of her past. In the quiet hours of the morning, she returned to the king's reliquary. She was looking for something Elias had mentioned, a reference to the First Mother's hearth. She found it hidden behind a false panel in a crate of old navigational charts. It was a small wooden music box carved from weirwood. When she touched it, a faint violet light pulsed beneath her skin. "You won't find them there," a voice said. Valentina turned to see Serafina. The noble woman looked different. Her expensive silks were rumpled and her eyes were red-rimmed. She wasn't sneering anymore. She looked terrified. "What do you want, Serafina? Come to tell me I have no rank again." "I came to tell you to run," Serafina whispered, glancing at the door. "Vance isn't gone. Not really. He's in contact with the architects. They're an underground society of alphas who believe that your bloodline is the great error of nature. They don't just want to exile you, Valentina, they want to harvest you." Valentina's blood ran cold. "Break time." "Harvest?" "They think your ability to command wolves is biological, a pheromone located in the bone marrow. They want to see if they can refine it into a gas, a way to make every wolf in the world a slave to whoever holds the canister." The horror of the revelation hit Valentina like a physical blow. Her ancestors weren't just hunted out of fear, they were hunted for utility. The council officially called for the trial of blood and bone. It was a brutal tradition. The Luna must lead a hunt through the Black Basin, a labyrinth of canyons filled with prehistoric predators, and return with the heart of the mountain, a rare obsidian stone guarded by a pack of feral, non-sentient dire wolves. Zarek refused to let her go. "It's a trap, Valentina. The architects will be waiting in those canyons. Burn the council chambers to the ground before I let you walk into that." "If you do that, you prove them right," Valentina said, her voice steady. She was standing by the window, the moonlight catching the silver of the music box. "They think I've made you weak. If you hide me, you confirm their fears. I have to go, not as your wife, but as a silent daughter." "I can't lose the quiet," Zarek whispered, pulling her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in that scent of rain and earth. "If something happens to you, the wolf won't just come back. He'll burn the world down to find you." "Then trust the silence," she murmured. The hunt began at midnight. Valentina was dressed in black tactical gear, a stark contrast to the ceremonial robes the council expected. She carried no silver, no blades, and no gun. "Break time, Einkel fives." Zarek watched from the ridge, his heart a drum of anxiety. He was forbidden from intervening, but his elite guards were stationed at the perimeter, ready to break every ancient law if Valentina screamed. As Valentina descended into the Black Basin, the air changed. The architects had indeed prepared. High-tech jamming towers rose from the canyon floor, emitting a low-frequency hum that blocked all communication. Suddenly, 4 shadows emerged from the rocks. They weren't wolves, they were men in gray suits, modern, clinical, and cold. "Valentina Ethelgard," the lead architect said, his voice amplified by a respirator mask. "You are a fascinating specimen. We've waited a long time for a living subject. Your marrow will save the alpha race from its own instability." They raised tranquilizer rifles. Valentina didn't move. She closed her eyes and felt the vibrations of the earth. She felt the hearts of the dire wolves guarding the obsidian stone a mile away. She felt the frantic, protective heartbeat of Zarek on the ridge above. And then, she reached deeper. She reached for the hollow inside herself, the place where the noise of the world went to die. "You speak of marrow and bone," Valentina said, her voice sounding as if it were coming from the stones themselves. "But you've forgotten that the wolf does not belong to you. The wolf belongs to the moon, and I am the moon's shadow." She didn't say Kneal, she sang. It was the low, wordless hum from her bedroom, but amplified. The frequency towers began to vibrate. The glass lenses of the architects' masks shattered. The men fell to their faces. Break time 05s, clutching their ears as the sound of the great stillness filled their skulls. It wasn't pain. It was the sheer, overwhelming weight of nothingness. A mile away, the feral dire wolves, creatures that had never obeyed a human in 10,000 years, emerged from their cave. They didn't attack. They ran toward her and formed a protective circle, their heads bowed low. One of them, a massive beast with fur like starlight, dropped the obsidian stone at her feet. Valentina returned to the ridge an hour later. She wasn't breathless. She wasn't bloodied. She walked up to the High Council, who were waiting with Elder Vance's secret allies. She threw the obsidian stone onto the table. It cracked the wood. Behind her, the four architects were being led in chains by the very dire wolves they had intended to. The trial is over, Valentina announced. Her eyes were no longer dark. They were glowing with a soft, permanent violet light. And so is the council's authority to question this bloodline. Zarek stepped forward, his wolf roaring in triumph inside his chest, a controlled, beautiful sound. He took the obsidian stone and crushed it in his fist, the dust falling like black snow. "My wife is the heart of the mountain," Zarek declared, his voice carrying across the entire valley. "And anyone who speaks of harvesting her will find out exactly what a king does when he has nothing left to fear." That night, in the privacy of their suite, the victory felt bittersweet. Valentina sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. Break time 05's, the power she had tapped into in the basin had changed her. The invisible Luna was becoming something visible, and visibility was dangerous. Zarek sat beside her, rubbing her shoulders. "You're shaking." "I felt them, Zarek," she whispered. "The architects, their minds were so full of greed. I almost didn't stop the song. I almost left them in the silence forever." Zarek turned her to face him. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "That's why you're the only one who can hold the power, Valentina. Because you're afraid of it. A tyrant would have enjoyed it. You're just tired." He kissed her forehead, a long, lingering press of lips that felt like a vow. "The contract is truly dead now," he whispered. "We aren't a political alliance. We aren't a prophecy. We are just two people trying to be human in a world of monsters." "Is it possible?" she asked, looking into his slate-gray eyes. "With you?" Zarek smiled, pulling her down onto the pillows as the rain began to fall again over the silver peaks, this time sounding less like mourning and more like a lullaby. "Anything is possible." The peace that had settled over the silver peaks felt like a fragile glass sculpture, beautiful but destined to shatter. While Zarek had successfully integrated the new laws of the Silent Luna into the Pack's foundation, a shadow was moving through the northern tundra. A new frequency was being heard in the dark, one that didn't bring silence but madness. The warning came not from a guard, but from the wolves themselves. Across the estate, hundreds of wolves began to whimper, braked .05's tucking their tails and hiding in the shadows of the glass corridors. Zarek felt a cold shiver run down his spine. It wasn't the madness returning. It was an external vibration that made his teeth ache. A woman walked up the main driveway of Obsidian Manor. She didn't arrive in a luxury SUV. She walked through the snow, barefoot, wearing a tattered dress of violet silk. She looked like a fractured mirror image of Valentina. Valentina stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart stopping. "Maeva?" The woman looked up. Her eyes weren't the steady, calm violet of Valentina's. They were a jagged, flickering purple, like a dying neon sign. This was Maeva, Valentina's younger sister, the one the archives had failed to mention. "You took the silence for yourself, sister," Maeva rasped, her voice sounding like broken glass. "You left me in the noise. You married a king and forgot that our bloodline doesn't just hold the peace, it holds the pain." Maeva had been found and refined by the remnants of the architects in the north. They hadn't wanted to harvest her bone marrow, they had wanted to weaponize her voice. While Valentina could silence a wolf's rage, Maeva had been taught to amplify it until the wolf's soul cracked. "Maeva, stop this," Valentina pleaded. Descending the stairs, "The architects used you. They turned your pain into a weapon." "I am the weapon," Maeva shrieked. As she opened her mouth, a sound erupted that was beyond human or wolf hearing. It was a high-frequency scream that acted like a physical blow. The glass windows of the grand hall shattered instantly. Every warrior in the room fell to their knees, blood trickling from their ears. Zarek lunged forward to protect Valentina, but the scream hit him like a wall of fire. His wolf, which had been so peaceful, was suddenly forced into a violent, agonizing shift. The scream didn't trigger his rage. It triggered his agony. "Zarek," Valentina cried, reaching for him. "Stay, back," Zarek groaned, his body contorting as the scream tore through his mind. Maeva was forcing him to shift into a mindless beast, intending to make him kill the very woman who had saved him. Maeva stood in the center of the shattered hall, her voice rising in pitch. "Look at your king, Valentina! Look at the tame dog you created! I will show the world that the wolf is meant to be a monster!" Valentina looked at Zarek. He was halfway through his shift, his eyes glowing gold and filled with tears of pain. He was fighting every instinct to lash out. Break timed 05s. She realized then that her silence wasn't enough. To save Zarek and the pack, she had to do the one thing her ancestors had forbidden. She had to take the scream into herself. Valentina walked toward her sister, ignoring the blood running down her own face from the sonic pressure. She didn't use a command. She didn't use power. She used her bond. "Zarek," she whispered through the roar. "Listen only to the heartbeat, not the sound, the beat." She reached Maeva and did something the younger sister never expected. She hugged her. Valentina pulled Maeva into a tight embrace, pressing her forehead against her sister's. She opened the hollow inside her soul, the vast, empty space of the silence, and invited the scream in. She became a lightning rod for the sound, drawing the agonizing frequency out of the air and out of the warriors' minds, and locking it within her own body. The silence that followed was absolute. Maeva collapsed, her voice spent, her eyes finally clearing as the corruption of the architects left her. Valentina stood for a moment, her body trembling with the suppressed energy of 1,000 screams, and then she too began to fall. Zarek caught her before she hit the glass-strewn floor. He was back in his human form, his hands shaking as he held her. "Valentina? Valentina, breathe!" For a terrifying minute the manor was dead quiet. No one moved, no one breathed. Then, Valentina let out a long, ragged exhale. The violet glow in her eyes dimmed to a soft, permanent hum. She had survived, but she had changed. Break time 05s. She was no longer just the invisible Luna. She was the keeper of the song. Zarek didn't look at his warriors. He didn't look at the shattered luxury of his home. He looked only at the woman who had nearly died to keep his soul intact. He didn't just kneel this time. He lowered his head until his forehead touched her hand, a gesture of ultimate, soul-deep devotion that no Alpha King had ever performed in the history of the world. "You are the crown," Zarek whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The throne is just a chair. The territory is just dirt. You are the only thing that matters." The aftermath was a time of healing. Maeva was not executed. She was taken to the Stillwood, a protected sanctuary, where Valentina helped her find the silence she had been denied. The architects were hunted to the ends of the earth and extinguished. Their technology turned to scrap, the Silver Peaks changed. The pack no longer valued the loudest alpha or the most violent warrior. They valued the steady heart. A year to the day after the contract marriage had begun, Zarek and Valentina stood on the cliffside where the prophecy had first been uttered. There were no cameras, no council members, and no elite noblewomen. "The year is up," Valentina said, the wind catching her charcoal coat. She looked at him with a playful spark in her eyes. "By the laws of the contract, I am a free woman. I have my financial security. I can leave." Zarek walked to her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, breathing in the scent of rain, earth, and the faint, sweet smell of a peace that was finally real. "You can," Zarek agreed, his voice a low, happy rumble. "But the wolf has a new law." "Oh, and what's that?" he says. "That the silence is his territory now," Zarek whispered, turning her in his arms. "And he doesn't let anyone trespass on his territory." He didn't need to say, "I love you." The words were too loud for the beauty of the moment. Instead, he kissed her, a soft, slow-burn promise that echoed across the peaks. As the sun set, the wolves of the Silver Peaks began their evening howl. It wasn't a scream of rage or a cry of hunger. It was a beautiful, haunting melody, a song of a king and his silent Luna, who had taught the world that the greatest power isn't found in the roar, but in the heart that knows how to be still. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to join the pack and never miss a story.